You're watching another edition of Faultlines. I'm Gauri Dwivedi. This week on the show, the first story, we're going to talk about how Asim Munir has been completely stunned by the Baloch rebels and what lies ahead and the impact of the Pakistan-China relationship. The next big story this week on Faultlines is whether or not the final pact between US and Russia regarding their nukes has ended. Does that mean now a race for humanity to get the next pact going? And the third important story on the show, well, AUKUS was supposed to be the big pact that was supposed to provide security to Australia. Has it now got up in smoke? And what are Australia's options? The big stories coming in this week on Faultlines. First up on the show, we get you details. The big focus this week on Faultlines coming in from the neighborhood. Pakistan's most volatile front line is on fire yet again. A wave of coordinated high-impact attacks has ripped through Balochistan. For those unaware, this is Pakistan's largest, poorest, and most resource-rich province. Islamabad says it's actually a war on terror. But Baloch rebels are quite clear that this is a war for their survival. This isn't a new battle. This has been raging on for decades and decades. The Balochistan Liberation Army, which is the largest separatist outfit in Balochistan, claims over 200 Pakistani security personnel were killed in a multi-day offensive. A figure that Pakistan disputes but doesn't fully explain. There were women suicide bombers this time. Military installations have been hit. Chinese-backed projects across CPEC have been impacted completely. This is about who controls the land, the minerals, the ports, and of course the people. Let's break this down for you on the big wall. First and foremost, exactly the details of what the operation was all about and why China and Pakistan are in fact both completely in it together. They are both equal stakeholders, viewers, in what is happening in Balochistan. First and foremost, there were 12 districts that were hit simultaneously. As I said, a multi-day offensive planned to the T, and you can see the BLA rebels actually now upping the ante against Pakistani Army. Next up, 200 plus deaths. This is what has been claimed by BLA. Something that has been disputed by Pakistan, but the BLA says it has proof to back these claims. Some civilian casualties have been confirmed by Pakistan. As I said, these have been multiple attacks, large scale, coordinated across days. So, of course, Pakistan has conceded that some civilian casualties have in fact taken place. For the first time, suicide bombers were not just men but also women. There were female suicide attackers who were part of these operations that were done by the BLA this time around, indicating that the separatist movement in Balochistan is not just limited to a handful. As I said, this is a long-drawn conflict, and we're going to come to that also, viewers, to tell you the historical aspect of this. But first, I want to take you exactly why this is our top story this week. $60 billion of the China corridor, that is the China-Pakistan economic corridor, stands completely exposed. China knows that as things stand right now, if the BLA continues with these attacks, its $60 billion and counting is completely vulnerable, exposed, and could essentially mean that the crown and its jewel of BRI could be completely wiped out. Lastly, and equally important, Baloch minerals, gas, ports have been contested, and that's where the big story lies. Now, so what we are seeing right now is violence that's patterned, political, and deeply historical. Balochistan sits on gold, gas, copper, and yet remains Pakistan's most marginalized province. China is building ports here. You have the Gwadar port right here in Balochistan. Islamabad is deploying troops. But the Baloch, well, they say they've been left with nothing but graves, disappearances, and complete silence. To understand why today these recent attacks look so coordinated, so desperate, so deadly, we have to go back decades. Here's the story of Balochistan, the genesis and the ticking timeline that has brought Pakistan to this moment, with Asim Munir now losing not just sleep but also the prospect of keeping his country together.
Balochistan was absorbed into Pakistan in 1948 and resistance began almost immediately. Since then, 5 major uprisings, each bloodier than the last. The land is vast and the people are few, just 15 million in a country of 240 million. But beneath the soil lies enormous wealth. Gas, copper, gold, coal, and a coastline that holds Gwadar, China's prized Arabian Sea gateway. For decades, Baloch leaders have argued the deal was simple. Military checkpoints multiplied, human rights groups document enforced disappearance, mass arrests, and alleged extrajudicial killings. Then came China. The $60 billion China-Pakistan economic corridor promised roads, ports, power, but delivered only exclusion. Projects were heavily guarded, jobs were outsourced, and decisions began being made far from Baloch homes. As a fallout, militancy escalated. The Balochistan Liberation Army, now designated a terrorist group by Pakistan and others, shifted tactics. It pivoted from ambushes to suicide attacks and high coordination urban strikes. This week's offensive, dubbed Herof Phase 2 by the BLA, stunned Pakistan's security establishment.
किसी भी सूबे में इस तरह नहीं होता। ये सिर्फ और सिर्फ जनाब स्पीकर एक क्रिमिनल जो गैंग है, ये सारा जो ट्रेड है, स्मगलिंग है, ये सारी की सारी इलीगल ट्रेड जो है, उसका जो मिलिट्री विंग है, जो उनको प्रोटेक्शन प्रोवाइड करता है, वो बीएलए है, जो अपने आप को लिबरेशन आर्मी कहता है, वो चोरों की आर्मी है।
Islamabad acknowledges civilian and security force deaths, but disputes rebel numbers. And as Pakistan courts China and the United States with mineral deals and investment summits, Balochistan keeps sending the same message. You cannot extract stability without consent. The recent use of female fighters was a glaring example that it's not only Baloch men that are involved in the movement. But as Pakistan doubles down on security and rejects dialogue, the space for peace keeps shrinking. Balochistan remains rich in minerals and poor in trust. And until that gap is closed, this flashpoint isn't going anywhere.
Now, viewers, Balochistan issue remains unresolved because there are massive historical grievances due to resource control, political exclusion, and the Punjabi-dominated Pakistan Army's persistent hunting of Baloch leaders. And the Pak Army General Asim Munir has still not understood that the Baloch insurgency has led to a complete pullout of Chinese officials and a complete pause in the work at the Gwadar airport. And it's not just the port. The entire corridor, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, is now extremely vulnerable because Balochistan is unstable. And this realization is now going to impact ties between Pakistan and China. When China is pumping in money into Pakistan, it's because it wants its share of and pound of flesh. It wants those returns. With those returns unlikely, that sovereign relationship is now set to be deeply impacted going forward. On to the other story that we are tracking this week on Faultlines. The last nuclear weapons pact between the United States and Russia is now, it has in fact expired. And with it, decades of armed control that was meant to stop the unthinkable for the first time since the Cold War. There will be no limits, no inspections, no rules governing the world's two biggest nuclear arsenals. Supporters warn that this could open the door to a new nuclear arms race. What went wrong? What's at stake? And how close the world is actually now to the edge? First, this report gets you the story so far, and then we take a look at the nuclear arsenals around the world. And what is it that we now need to replace the treaty that expired this week?
The moment nuclear experts have long feared has now arrived. The The last treaty limiting the world's two largest nuclear arsenals has expired, quietly ending an era of atomic restraint between the US and Russia. The New START treaty has officially lapsed. For the first time in over 50 years, there are no legally binding caps on the number of deployed nuclear weapons held by either Washington or Moscow. New START, signed in 2010, was designed to prevent exactly this moment. The treaty limited each country to 1,550 deployed strategic nuclear warheads. It capped 700 deployed delivery systems. That's intercontinental missiles, submarine-launched missiles, and heavy bombers. And it allowed for 800 total launchers, whether deployed or not. Crucially, it also mandated inspections and data exchanges. Experts fear the termination of the New START treaty would set the stage for a nuclear arms race. For 15 years, this agreement formed the very backbone of global nuclear stability. But now, amid the war in Ukraine and deepening distrust between the West and Moscow, that framework has collapsed. Without caps, both nations are now free to expand their arsenals, deploy more warheads, and modernize their delivery systems. The New START treaty was one of the final guardrails of the post-Cold War nuclear order. The looming question: has a dangerous arms race already begun?
So you see where exactly things stand right now. Things stand at the precipice, given how volatile the situation is right now. Now, the safety net is gone, stakes are sky high, and for decades, arms control kept nuclear ambition in check. As treaties fade, tensions rise, the world's nuclear balance is shifting fast. Some nations already hold massive arsenals, others are racing to expand influence. Deterrence or leverage? To understand, let me now walk you through exactly the kind of nuclear arsenal some of the largest countries actually hold. First and foremost, America, that has close to 5,900 nuclear warheads right now. This is the world's biggest stockpile as it stands right now. Close on that is Russia. 5,200 is the warheads. Remember, this is a rivalry that goes all the way back to the Cold War era, which is why these two countries have historically had the largest stockpile. Russia has about 5,200 warheads, largest deployed arsenal. That's important because the Russia-Ukraine war has been going on, and more than once the nuclear threat was actually raised during that conflict, something that President Putin had made a mention of. Next up, let's get you China. That's the third one. That of course, was US and Russia. The next one is China, which stands at 500. But the important part is it's rapidly growing. China has deep aspirations of hegemony, and all of that gets reflected in the rapid increase in its nuclear stockpile. Then comes France, which has about 290 nuclear warheads. It has an independent nuclear deterrent, how it should be for a responsible country. Next up is United Kingdom, which is at 225 warheads. Now, as far as UK is concerned, this is largely a sea-based nuclear force, and that is where its main expertise lies. Next up, you have India and Pakistan. First and foremost, India, that you have 180 warheads. And this is a country, India is a country which has always said that we are responsible. We have a no first use policy, something that's extremely important to be noted. Now, as far as Pakistan is concerned, a country that actually stole nuclear technology, got it through means which were completely illegitimate, and that stands at 170. It's warheads, and a larger question that has always been there as to who really holds the nuclear button when it comes to Islamabad. Most certainly not Shahbaz Sharif. Last is North Korea, another country that adds to volatility in the world. At about 50 is the estimated warheads. Nuclear ambitions have been told to everyone, even though there are concerns about whether that technology remains outdated or not. But a country that has never allowed inspections, and the reason why that adds to volatility. Let's get in Cormac Smith, who's a former British diplomat, joining us from London. Mr. Smith, thanks so much for speaking to us. You've had long stints in important positions, including that in Ukraine as well. You've been part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs there. Good to have you on the show, sir. Let me start by asking you, are you worried that this treaty has expired and there isn't any pact that is replacing the earlier treaty?
Look, this is very bad news, but I think we need to put it in the context. This is going to make the world a far less safe place. But let us put it into context. And let's put it into context of the old world order, imperfect as it was, that had been in place since the end of the Second World War, has effectively broken down. And with a new, what I will call détente between Russia and America under Putin and Trump, the fear is not that we are going to have a nuclear war between the US and Russia. That will simply never happen, because mutually assured destruction would most certainly happen. What this does is it provides a lot more instability through the rest of the world, and I believe this could be, if it's not rectified, a driver for further nuclear proliferation among smaller states. And if I can explain why I think it is, under the new world order envisaged by Trump and Putin, there would be international law becomes less important. Might becomes right. And it is very, very clear from recent American documents that the vision is for a world dominated by the US, Russia, and China, with spheres of influence. And there may well be a role for India to play in that, I understand, in the aspirations of Trump. This means, and it was Mark Carney who said only 2 weeks at Davos, that the old order is gone. It's not breaking up anymore, as I've been saying for 4 years. It is gone. And in that world, the smaller states need to come together in an alliance to protect themselves. And that, I'm afraid, is likely to encourage more nuclear proliferation and smaller states to get nuclear weapons.
Mr. Smith, you made a very valid point that the old world order has pretty much now crumbled. The last of the vestiges of that world order was this treaty. There isn't any understanding that replaces it. I want to understand from you that when you talk about nuclear proliferation, that arms race to get a fresh fillip with lack of treaty, how do we then put in guardrails? Or are we then to just believe that there are no more guardrails in a nuclear arms race?
Well, look, my understanding at the moment, and I'm 63, so I went to school and university in the 70s and 80s, and I grew up in the time of the Cold War. Well, yes, the Cold War era. And that was our guardrail then, was mutually assured destruction. This is no longer the case. We have the rising now of a new world order, where, as I said, international law is clearly becoming less important. We heard from Antonio Guterres, the head of the UN. The UN is becoming increasingly, I would suggest, irrelevant and impotent. So this is going to drive smaller countries to, if they want to have security, to think about getting their own nuclear arsenals. I will give you an example. If Ukraine had not given up the world's third largest nuclear arsenal in 1994 under the Budapest Memorandum, all of my Ukrainian friends very, very clearly believe that Russia would never have invaded Ukraine if Ukraine had that massive nuclear arsenal. And certainly the people I speak to in Ukraine are very regretful of the fact that they did give them up. And countries like Ukraine may well now be thinking of getting their own nuclear arsenal.
Mr. Smith, I understand that's a very important position. Let me now then ask you about responsible countries like India. We've always said we have a no first use doctrine, even though our neighbors, we live in the world's most hostile neighbors, and both sides we have nuclear armed neighbors. Both of them have never said no to first use. So how can countries like India, which have been responsible about nuclear weapons technology, take the lead in such a volatile situation?
It's very, very difficult, isn't it, with institutions like the United Nations, as I have just said, becoming less important in the world, and they should not be less important, but they clearly are becoming less important and less influential. So India, of course, in this new world order, you know, there may well be a place for India with your 1.3 billion people and an economy that is rising and in size and strength massively. So I do see a very key role for India in whatever new world order would emerge, and I would hope that India, as the world's largest democracy, would play a moderating role to try and bring sense to other powerful nations, because, you know, in a world where might is right and the weak go to the wall, a country like India has a massive, I think, both duty and potential for good. Now, that is, I'm not going to say what India is going to do going forward, but India certainly has a massive potential for good in the world as we go forward.
All right, Mr. Smith, thanks much for speaking to us on Faultlines on a very important issue that concerns, well, humanity. Now, viewers, the Trump administration wanted the treaty to lapse to introduce Trump-class nuclear-armed battleships, Donald Trump's lasting legacy. And they are betting on the diminished resources of Russia, making it almost impossible for Moscow to match Washington, D.C.'s ability. But in 2026, it's not just about America and Russia anymore. We are no more in the Cold War era. In this, the New World Order requires a new treaty that aims to limit nuclear stockpiles, not just of America and Russia, but of China as well. A nation that's racing to get more nukes than anyone else, under a president that wants to annex Taiwan by 2027. The United Nations, despite being a relic of the Cold War era, must insist on a comprehensive nuke treaty with US, Russia, and China being part of it. All right, viewers, on that note, slipping into a very short break, we come back on the other side, tell you more about AUKUS Pact and if it's still relevant for Australia or not. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We now take you to the land down under, where there are new doubts over Australia's nuclear submarine future. United States congressional report recently raised the prospect that Australia may never receive the AUKUS submarines it had ordered, despite a lot of, enough and more song and dance about it, committing almost $1/3 trillion to the program. Now, this report also explored the option of sending American submarines to Canberra, which will stay under Washington's control, completely different from what the AUKUS understanding was. This comes as relations with Washington are witnessing an unprecedented dip under Trump 2.0 administration, and the United Kingdom under Keir Starmer facing similar production line issues. The submarines are considered essential to Australia's long-range deterrence, stealth surveillance, and regional power projection. But now the question is whether Australia gets the submarines at all or not, or simply just manages to host American ones. Let's take a look at how things stand right now. First and foremost, the nuclear submarine deal that was signed under much song and dance now stands completely in deep uncertainty. And this impacts Australia very significantly because it is in the Indo-Pacific where China is looking to scale up its presence even more. Now, almost $368 billion has been committed by Australia till now. That's almost $1/3 of $1 trillion of money committed to get world-class submarines. 0 of those have been delivered, and the prospect of getting any of them soon also is now very dim. First boat is set to be available by 2032. That's the earliest timeline, and even that looks difficult at this stage. Now, this is important for long-range deterrence. As I said, Australia also is in the Pacific, exactly where China now wants to wield greater influence. And that is why AUKUS was actually signed to send out a strong message to Chinese President Xi Jinping. But that message really loses its relevance, value, if this is how the deal looks right now. The US fleet is actually shot by 17 ports, which means that Donald Trump wants that this should actually prioritize American interests over the interests of allies, something that comes almost naturally to the Trump administration. And that puts deep question marks over the ability of some of these countries to collectively take on China in the Indo-Pacific, in the Pacific region. All right, with that, we wrap things up on this edition of Faultlines. Thanks so much for watching. We come back next week with yet another conflict, yet another war zone, yet another fault line decoded.